Call this meeting of the Board of Education for School District 72 Campbell River to order. Meeting May 31st, 2022 to order at 7:30 p.m. We'll move to the Chairperson's remarks. So, good evening. I acknowledge on behalf of the Board of Trustees that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Ttoc people. I'm John Kerr, Chairperson of the School District 72 Board of Education. In attendance this evening are Trustees Joyce McMahon, Richard Franklin, Susan Wilson, Daryl Hagan, and I'm sorry. I repeated a name here. Okay, Trustee Shannon Briggs sends her regrets, but she will be attending remotely. Also in attendance are Superintendent Dr. Jeremy Morrow, Associate Superintendents Morgan Kyle and Phil Seismic, as well as Secretary Treasurer Kevin Patrick. Present also are Natalie Crawshaw, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and Secretary Treasurer, Jennifer Patrick, Manager of Communications, and providing technical support is Jonathan Carrier, IT Technician. Please note that there is a 20-second production delay between the live event that you are viewing and the meeting participants. Question and answer function is open for questions on agenda items for this meeting. Questions that are posed during the meeting will be addressed at the end of the session. In April, the Ministry of Education and Childcare made an announcement concerning childcare in School District 72. The district made 7 applications to provide childcare in 7 locations. All 7 applications were approved, allowing the district to provide approximately 210 spaces for before and after school childcare. For a district to have all applications approved is almost unheard of and speaks to the strength and thoroughness of the applications. The facilities for this service will be freestanding at each location. 6 of the sites will be in Campbell River and one will be on Quadra Island under the auspices of the Quadra Children's Society. Service in the Campbell River locations will be provided by educational assistance, and fees for this service have yet to be determined. This is a win-win-win for parents, the district, and the community. Campbell River has a serious shortage of before and after school childcare spaces, and this will partially address this need. I would like to acknowledge Associate Superintendent Phil Seismic for his excellent work in leading this initiative, as well as many in the childcare community in Campbell River and Quadra Island who supported him in this effort. During this meeting, the board will be presented with the final 2022-23 operating budget. It will then vote to accept or reject this budget. Over the past several years, the board has managed to avoid service reductions, sometimes called cuts, by using its operating surplus from previous years in compliance with ministry directives. This year, the district faced a $2.1 million deficit, and after last year's $3.2 million deficit. By law, boards of education are required to submit balanced budget. The deficit over the past 2 years was aggravated by the extra costs incurred by the COVID-19 pandemic, inflation, and costs that were passed on to boards without additional funding from the province. These costs include inflation, which over the past year has exceeded 6% and which affects all costs not related to staff salary and which have never been accounted for in funding for districts. The lack of funding to account for inflation is a built-in cut that the district must deal with every year. Over the past year, teacher on-call costs caused by COVID-19 mitigation efforts exceeded the budget by almost $1 million, again not funded by the province. In addition, the province has required boards to provide up to 5 sick days for casual employees. The effect of this unfunded mandate is approximately $200,000 a year. Presently, the board no longer has a surplus that is sufficient to cover these additional costs, so reductions in services have been required. While the board has made every effort to keep these reductions away from classrooms, reductions do impact student learning. In my remarks to the March 8th public meeting, I addressed these concerns. Further, over the past 3 months, the board has gone through an extensive budget process which involved consultation with many groups where the realities of our situation were presented and comments were invited from these groups and the public. The board has received a great deal of input and has taken it into account in the formulation of the budget. Tonight's decision will be based on the realities of a system that is facing constant cost pressures in a wide variety of areas and that continue to remain either unfunded or underfunded by the province. Unless and until the provincial government decides to fully fund public education, the board will continue to face very difficult choices in future budgets. And that is the harsh reality. Finally, we are now in the last month of our school year. Students will be doing field trips and other year-end activities, while our grade 12 students will be preparing for graduation. In the lead up to summer vacation, I urge everyone to enjoy this time of year and be safe. There is nothing more tragic than losing someone to serious injury or worse at the beginning of their adult life. So have fun, but be careful as well. Thank you. We'll move on to superintendent remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Chairperson Kerr. I was reflecting as I prepared my comments for tonight, just how nice it was tonight to be able to share about some year-end activities and celebrations that are starting to occur, and how different it was even a year ago in regards to some of those opportunities. So I do recognize that we're not through the pandemic and that there still are ongoing ramifications and implications from it, but I am grateful tonight to share a few of the occasions that have brought people together in a new way this May. One of those pieces, which is unbelievable planning on everyone's part to actually plan a Cedar feast on a sunny day. This particular spring, that's quite remarkable. But Cedar did enjoy a special salmon feast last Friday on the 20th. This is where students, staff, and guests were treated to traditional salmon prepared by Andy Speck and his son Cole Speck. And as well, the Cedar Drum Group, a group of students, performed the Pelican Song led by knowledge keeper Quiet Sam. And so it was a really special celebration there. We also had a special celebration at Ripple Rock last Friday, where there was a beautiful mural unveiled in the library that was created by local artist Jessica Chakite, and there was a blessing to unveil that mural. Phoenix mountain bikers owned the podium in the recent Island Series cross-country races in Cumberland, and this school's mountain bike club has been running for 6 years, and students ride every Wednesday. And they also participate in local races. Rainer, trying to see the Secretary Treasurer nodding. He's loving this biking update. And so there's 3 students in particular that I want to provide congratulations to. That's Ben Petcher, Cameron Meldrum, and Alex Rasher. And while I'm talking about bikes, I'm not sure if you've heard some of the radio announcements, but Phoenix this week is really encouraging students to get to school in a healthy way. It's Bike to Work Week. I think it's Wheels on Heels and some other slogans to encourage active participation as part, and that's part of their initiative from a grant that they received earlier this year. And since we're on Team Phoenix, I'll just mention that Phoenix School also hosted a 4-day internal school dodgeball tournament with the intention of building school spirit and at the same time raising funds for Tour de Rock. So they had close to 350 students, 16 dodgeball teams, and they raised $572 for Tour de Rock. I want to share and celebrate that we had 13 Carey High media students that attended the BC Student Film Festival at Capilano University in North Vancouver earlier this month. This festival afforded students the chance to participate in workshops delivered by members of the film industry, and again, just another creative way of capturing student interests and having real relevant experience in industry. I want to say congratulations to the senior girls soccer team at Carey High for their excellent season, and we wish them good luck later this week when they travel to Vancouver to compete in the provincial tournament. I just want to express my gratitude to the many educators and students that I've been able to connect with recently in some recent school visits. It is such a great time, and Chairperson Kerr alluded to it, where we're acknowledging milestones and where there's celebrations and those year-end activities, and students just engaged in their learning and teachers making that learning relevant in a great way. I want to share as well that summer school has received a significant amount of interest already. We already have more students registered than we did last year, and that we've actually had to expand some program offerings where we could to accommodate a significant wait list in some of the programs to deal with that high demand. And then I will just echo Chairperson Kerr in acknowledging that this year we have the benefit of returning to face-to-face year-end graduation celebrations. And as excited as we are to see these, the return of these events, I just want to acknowledge how hard schools and dedicated parents work to create memorable and safe events for students. And so we are asking all of our students to participate and celebrate their accomplishments responsibly this month. We are wanting to make sure that those celebrations occur, but they occur safely. And I will just share that we have 3 exciting dates to make note of, which is commencement for Rob Run, which is June 24th. Carey High has commencement June 28th, and Timberline has commencement June 29th. And I am aware that Timberline will be celebrating their prom this Saturday, and next Saturday Carey High will be celebrating theirs. I believe both schools will marshal at the foreshore for their formal pictures, and it's interesting. I had a grad in the 2020 year, and now a grad in the 2022 year, and the difference between those 2 years is quite significant. So I'm grateful for those students who now have the opportunity to return to some of those much anticipated year-end events. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes of the meeting from May 3, 2022. And I have a suggested motion here that the minutes of the meeting of May 3rd, 2022 are hereby approved as circulated. We have a mover for that, Trustee Franklin, Trustee Wilson. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? The motion is carried. We move to item following item minutes, approval of the minutes of the meeting of May 17th. So the suggested motion is that the minutes of the meeting of May 17, 2022 are hereby approved as circulated. We have a mover for that. Trustee Franklin, seconded by Trustee Eddy. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, the motion is passed. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Hearing none. Are there any additions or alterations to the agenda? Okay, and hearing that, then we will move to approval of the agenda, and the suggested motion is that the agenda is hereby approved as circulated. Moved by Trustee Wilson, seconded by Trustee McMahon. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. We will move to item 7, the report of board decisions from the May 31st, 2022 confidential board meeting. Vice Chair Eddy.
This evening in the confidential board meeting, we discussed matters of lands, legal, and personnel. We have not quite completed our agenda and will be returning after the meeting.
Thank you. Educational submissions, then we'll move to Associate Superintendent Kyle and Superintendent Morrow.
Thank you. I'll see that.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to do some clarification on literacy. We've had some questions from the public around literacy, and we just want to provide some clarity that literacy is going to be attended to in a very significant way, as it has been for the last few years. Part of the board's strategic plan is priority 1, which is improve student achievement, and students will fully meet or exceed expectations in literacy and numeracy. We are continuing with that direction the board has provided for us. And what we did was 2 years ago, the board made a significant investment of $400,000 to enhance what was happening with literacy. The hard work of teachers and educators that are in schools, we needed to look at building an increasing capacity of teachers in the classroom, knowing that that is the group that spends the most time with kids. How do we make sure that we are providing more tools for a toolbox when they are working with students of diverse needs across the spectrum in literacy? So that work is absolutely going to continue. The decision that we had made was to hire 3 literacy coordinators to help do that work. And the focus was on pedagogy, best research, best practices and evidence-based. So that's the pedagogy and those coordinators working with teachers. The other side is on early intervention. We know that the earlier we intervene with students who might have some unique challenges with their learning, the more likely they are to be successful. So that was the focus. What this also had done with the 2-year ago investment was really increase the conversation around literacy with educators, administrators at the district level. So the coordinators were a piece of it, but it really was and continues to be the work of all educators, all people that are working with students. And that work, again, will continue. Right now, where are we? In the last 2 years, we have introduced DIBELS as a district-wide screener for all students in K-5 and was introduced at one middle school last year, at both middle schools this year. The press is something that all LST teachers in our district have been trained to do, and others that are interested, again, for intervention and programming with students. We've had the literacy coordinators. We introduced the literacy leads within each school. Flyleaf resource, that was a $100,000 investment last year for a really, really significant resource that is in every elementary school. And this year has been working with it and learning how to use that resource. So it is in the schools. That obviously will continue. We have had one of our coordinators develop this year a literacy framework companion. Every teacher in elementary received one of these as a companion to literacy. That is a tool that they will continue to have and to use. The coordinators also developed a learning hub website with resources for parents, for students, and for teachers. So a lot of that work has been done. We have had administration meetings with all administrators, and we've had 4 of them focusing on literacy. How do you use data? What story is it telling you? And we've had our district data collection. So what will it be next year? We will still have DIBELS. We will still have the press. We will have, at this point, 1 literacy coordinator. We're going to have literacy leads at 3 of the schools that do not have full-time teacher librarians. We continue with the Flyleaf resource. We still have the companion, and we will still continue to have admin meetings focusing on literacy, and we'll continue with district data collection. So over time, we can see, are we doing the right work in the right way for the right folks? This is some of the data that has been collected. This is data from the DIBELS screener, and you'll see that there are 2 blue and a pink. That was for the fall and the spring, and all schools K-5 are doing the screeners again. So we've got 3 points of data. The lower graph is report cards, which we have brought in this year. So again, another data piece. But I want to make it really clear as well is that these are some district data pieces, but teachers are doing ongoing formative assessment and different types of assessments so that they've got ongoing data to help them inform what students are needing. How does it inform their practice? Do you have a question?
Can we do that focus? It's really hard.
Yeah, the point I put it in was really just to show that we're collecting the data than the specifics, but thank you. So what does it look like going into? We've had a budget reduction of $100,000, but we do have still $197,000 to allocate. We are still determining what is the best way to move forward. When we had brought in the literacy coordinators, it was never intended to be a forever thing. Really, the work that they're doing, if received and work being done, that they would work themselves out of a position because we would have increased the capacity to such a significant degree that their work would have been fulfilled. So again, the board has, within this very, very tight budget, has still committed to enhancing our literacy in our district. And again, I just want to reiterate that teachers and administrators have been working hard on this all along. It's not a new thing. It's not a, okay, well, now we'll work on literacy. Everybody's been doing that. This really was to enhance the work that was being done in a more coordinated way and really engage in conversation around literacy and what can we do. So we will still be supporting. We will still make literacy our priority for next year. Are there any questions? Or is there anything that anybody wanted to add in?
Will this be posted on the district website, this presentation?
Possibly.
Could be.
Sure, we could. Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I'm looking to Jennifer Packard. That,
Yes.
yes, thank you. Trustee.
I really appreciate the fact, given that there were, I think, maybe some misunderstandings coming out of the budget presentation on the 17th, that the district was abandoning any efforts in improving literacy. And you've made it very clear that the district will continue to focus on literacy. There has been a bit of a hit, but not nearly as much as I think people may have read into it from looking at the budget budget presentation. And I think probably that was maybe partially our fault in that our questions and the presentation didn't make that as clear as it might have been. But I really appreciate the fact that you come back and made it very clear that we are not abandoning, we are not, so that's our primary focus, is literacy. And we're not about to get out of the business of literacy. We will continue to do it, although again, we've had to rationalize our expenditures in this area just as we have in many other areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Moore, did you have anything you want to add?
That covered it. Thank you.
Okay, then we get to the highlight of the evening. Our annual budget bylaw for the the fiscal year. Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
So yes, I will bring some. So tonight I'm going to present the preliminary budget for 22-23. Now, typically at this board meeting, it's when we presented the list of suggestions at the prior board meeting. We give the public an opportunity to provide some input. We did receive some input, which is with the predominant concerns being the literacy reductions that we're making. And that's why, thank you, Associate Superintendent Morgan Kyle, for sharing that. So it just gives a bit more background. When we present, as you will experience right now, I don't have 2 hours to share and go into all the detail at these presentations. We do have extensive conversations with the board when we go, so we are able to share, take more time to share with the board some of the details with these presentations. And yeah, this will be the summary, but this really doesn't touch on what a lot of the focus was, which were the list of items that we introduced last week. So it kind of, I'm going to be comparing last year with this year. So with the documents that you have in front of you, we've got the preliminary budget. When we did the budget reductions and we had the list, we were comparing, and some of the references that I made were compared to the final budget. Looking at the preliminary budget, when you take a look at last year, I think the first notable thing is the FTE. When you look at last year to this year, is up 100 FTE, but that is not what the focus is. That's not what my message has been from the beginning of this process. This budget of 2022 was prepared in spring of last year. When September came, we had 100 students more than what this preliminary budget had shown. And so you'll see that reflected in a lot of the other documents. And again, it doesn't reflect, I think, some of what the conversation has been since we started this budget process, but I do have to refer back to it. So this budget, we're actually gonna be asking the board to approve $75 million bylaw for the preliminary budget. And that $75 million includes not only the operating budget, but it also includes the capital budget as well as a special, what we call a special purpose fund budget. So what you have in front of you, we have made the reductions that were proposed last week. And we did hear some public feedback from this year. It was great to hear. People who reached to me directly, I was able to respond to them and provide some of the further detail that we don't have time to share in a public meeting. But we've proceeded with those reductions as they were presented at last meeting, and they've been worked into here. So with that change from up 100 students, you can see some of that just reflected in the difference in revenue from 71 million last year to 74.6 million this year. It's about a $3.5 million increase. Then on the expense side, you'll see about a $3 million increase, and that was related to wages went up 1.8 million. Predominantly, most of that was just the wage increase that we had experienced. But then $800,000 of that increase was also related to capital expenses. And the board, when what the board has discretion over is predominantly the operating, which we'll get to later in the presentation. The capital expenses, as they come, the board receives funding and the board spends it. So it's less of a discretionary, which is generally why it isn't brought up as part of our budget process. And then there was about a $400,000 increase in special purpose fund. Again, we receive $400,000, we spend $400,000. So it really balances out. The other thing to kind of note here is last year we had a deficit that we were able to draw of $680,000. This year, the $2.1 million actually took our budget down to zero. This $150,000 was the line item on the list that referred to the international program supporting contributing $150,000 to balancing the budget. So that balances the board's budget. I do have to point out there is still about $700,000 of one-time items that lead to a structural deficit. So, you know, as difficult as this year was, that $700,000 will be back again in costs next year that potentially will still need to be looked at. Again, but hopefully we can see some growth. Hopefully, as we move forward to next September, we'll see our FTE be at 5769 rather than 5569. So I will move on to the next schedule, which is Schedule 2 in your documents. And this is the operating. This is the operating revenues and expenses. And so really what I just want to point out, so we've had about a $2 million increase in revenues. 1.5 of that came from the increase in 1.5 million came from the increase in students, but about $500,000 of that increase came from our international programs. So there's a really positive. I know international programs in a lot of districts contribute a lot. There, of course, there's the student and the cultural interaction and engagement, but it's really starting to help out with just some general school functions or the general budget functions. On the expense side, we have gone up $1.8 million. Again, most of that was wages with a good portion. So 1.3 million was wages and about 500,000 was some of that general inflationary costs that we had experienced. I will. Yeah, sorry.
When you're discussing wages, is that the wages for coverage of the pandemic costs for TTOC costs, or are those the wages that were contract
So the,
increases.
so the wage increases. So $1.3 million of the wage increase was for just general wage increases.
As per contracts.
Yeah, yeah. And then with this, because we're comparing it to the preliminary last spring, some of the difference are the additional staffing positions to support those extra 100 FTE.
Thank you.
So this really, this is kind of the big summary of our operating budget. This was what all the engagement and the work was that we had looked at. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail through schedules 2 further. But I will just touch on, because everything rolls up to that front page, we have the operating, we have the capital, and we have the special purpose. I will touch on the special purpose, and I will also touch a little bit on the capital before going back. So, so our special purpose fund. So special purpose funds are monies that are given to us by a third-party entity. Most of our budget for special purpose fund comes from the government, and they basically say you can only spend that revenue on this function, on this expense. So we don't include it as part of our operating because we can't choose. There's no board discretion with those, but it supports some pretty significant programs. There's like $3.2 million classroom enhancement fund, which supports an extra 32 FTE. We've got community links program that's like a $600,000 program, and if we don't spend it, we've got to save it for next year, and that's why it stays in its own fund like this. And there's all sorts of other things. There's some of the scholarship funds are run through that. Again, when we receive it for a scholarship, we save it for a scholarship. It can only be spent on scholarships. But that program, whatever we declare as an expense, it gets offset with the revenue. But it is providing a lot of significant additional services to our district. Then the next item on schedule 4 is our capital. And so capital really is usually an asset that's purchased, it's capitalized, and then it starts to get amortized. What you see on schedule 4 are the amortizations. So the annual amortization costs. A lot of what we get when we do purchase an asset, we receive as a grant. So we actually amortize the grant as well, and those two tend to offset each other. But some of the expenses that you see here, so there's this line, $4.7 million of expenses last year to $5.5 million this year. Some of the capital items with the funding that we get can't be capitalized. So you've seen a pretty big increase in expenses there for roofs. One of the big capital grants that we get that we often are doing is paying for roofs. We can't capitalize that, so it shows up as an expense. So again, it shows up on the expense, but it's not discretionary for the board because it comes from a capital fund account. So all of that, when you can put that all together, leads to that $75 million expense. And that kind of leaves us still, it balances the budget, but still leaves the board in a tough budget. So coming off this current year, a $3.2 million deficit, you saw in the preliminary that it started out with a $680,000 deficit, but it ballooned up to a $3.2 million deficit. And COVID costs were an item and a reason for that. And we did have a question, what were the COVID costs when schools were shut? Well, we had our TTOC sick replacement costs went up a lot and had to adjust budgets up $1 million there. We had those increase in students up 100, so that cost, that's actually not COVID related, but that was a bit of a cost. And then we had some Additional with some of the COVID costs, we had the TTOC costs, but we had a lot of additional cleaning, both for labor, supplies. We spent tens of thousands of dollars on masks and various things to support some of the COVID, some of the COVID costs. The very first year we had COVID, most of it was funded. This current year with a $3.2 million deficit wasn't funded. So the board has had to basically cover it through deficit. Now into this year with an additional $2.1 million deficit, that really has taken the board's deficit or surplus from a $6 million combined down to less than $1 million. So as of and with this proposed budget, that'll leave the board with a $200,000 left in the emergency contingency and $400,000 left in the just unrestricted surplus. And you'll recall in January, we were dealing with a budget increase mid-year unexpected of $1 million. If that occurs again, we do not have the money to cover this. So the goal is, and I will present another schedule later tonight, that with this budget that budget year we're currently in, that we will come in under budget and it can help start to replenish some of those reserves. So so we're in a difficult position. This has been a very difficult budget, a lot of consultation that we did. I want to thank everybody that participated in the budget sessions. 95% of the changes came directly from the feedback forms. I'm not, this isn't a secretary treasurer budget. This is a stakeholder. This is a staff budget. I rely on the expertise of those around us, and the feedback that we get, that 95%, those are the people that work closest with the kids, and they bring it to all that information to senior management to then take a look and try to align. And yeah, there's no question. I know there's been concerns about the cuts and reductions, and we are too. We'd rather be adding $100,000 to literacy than taking away. But you know, this is the state we're in, and we're lucky that we've been able to identify to balance the budget, and just we will need to be monitoring budgets, cost, expenses as we go forward very, very closely until the board and the school district turns around financially. So, you know, cost in funding is the big piece, and really, you know, the hope is that funding can go up in some manner, either through students or through the general block grant, and that'll help the board. So, so that's the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Trustee Hagan.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for their input into the budget process. It's been thorough. I think the responses have been very thoughtful. It's hard to think that in these times that we're looking at, I believe it's 4 positions that are going to be laid off. Those are people that will affect lives. Hopefully they will be absorbed through attrition. It is a loss. $100,000, it is a loss. And it's not a cut that we took lightly or we're looking at lightly. We really had expected the government to step up to the plate and fund some of the things that they had asked for. We had a hope that they would step up to the plate and reflect upon inflation. I mean, every time I go to the, I can think only in English now, petrol station to the gas station, you know, I fill up a tank of gas, and the other day I thought, I didn't even think my car holds that much. And costs are going up all over the place. I realize it's going up for the government as well, but I think it's a matter of priorities. If you want to fund a system that's going to be good for kids in Campbell River, then let's not make us the people who have to make all your cuts. Let's have the government actually address the issues and come to the table. They actually took away our right to taxation. I've been here that long. Used to be the day when we were short like this, we could just say, well, let's see if the taxpayers are willing to come up with that money that we need for reading. And we can make those decisions. But the government decided it wanted to take over all that funding that you pay taxes on, it goes to the government, then they decide where it's gonna go or not go. But then they decide on new initiatives, they decide on where they want to put that money, and we are left saying, well, now we're the employer, but we have no money for it. So all I'm saying is that I wish the government would actually, if they say education is important, is to put their money up front. There are other projects going on in this province that are going to be spending lots of money. We've been asking for a new school. We've asked for an increase in this area of inflation and sick time. And I'm not even sure if we've heard a response. So that would be my question in all this is, have we heard a response back at the on any level of whether or not they're going to consider addressing a couple of those issues?
I haven't heard. There's nothing so far from the ministry about the Employment Standards Act change to provide casuals with sick pay and give us funding for it.
Other questions? Could I point out one small thing? You know, it really is a small thing in the overall scheme of things, but if you go to Schedule 2 on page 2, under the expenses, second line under expenses, district administration, and a lot of the items were increased from last year. But if you look at district administration, the amount for district administration decreased $128,000 from last year. So I want people to understand that administration is taking a hit as well. It's not the empire up in the second floor of the board offices, you know, above all of this stuff. The senior administration is taking a hit as well. So just so that people are aware of that.
Yeah, there were the school board office allocated supply and service funds that were cut. There's also been a reduction of technically three positions that have come out of administration.
Okay, are there other questions? Then we can move on then to the next item on the agenda, which will be, get my agenda open again. It will be the annual budget bylaw, and this will require a unanimous motion to hold all three readings at this meeting. So the suggested motion is that the board hold all required readings of the annual budget bylaw in the amount of $75,933,412 for the fiscal year 2022-2023 at this meeting. Moved by Cat Eddie, seconded by Trustee Franklin, Richard Franklin. Okay, discussion. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. And we then move into. Okay. First reading, that the annual budget bylaw in the amount of $75,933,412 for the fiscal year 2022-23 pursuant to section 113 of the School Act be and is hereby read for the first time. Moved by Trustee Hagan, seconded by Trustee Eddy. Okay, is there any discussion? All those in favor? The motion is passed. Okay, and moving on then, that the annual budget bylaw, the amount of $75,933,412 for the fiscal year 2022-2023 pursuant to section 113 of the School Act be and is hereby read for the second time. Moved by Trustee McMahon, seconded by Trustee Hagan. Okay, discussion? All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. And for the third and final time, that the annual budget bylaw in the amount of $75,933,412 for the fiscal year 2022-23 pursuant to section 113 of the School Act be and is hereby read for the third time passed and adopted. Moved by trustee Wilson, seconded by trustee Eddie. Discussion? All those in favor? Motion is passed. So we have a budget for next year. And then we can move on to the draft schedule, draft board meeting schedule. For Treasurer Patrick.
Yeah, so we have a draft. We did circulate it earlier. And I believe there was a small change to it. But it, and so we've settled on what is presented before you.
Okay. We suggest, can I read the motion
Yeah.
and get it moved and then we'll discuss it? Okay, so the suggested motion is that the draft Board of Education meeting schedule for 2022-2023 be adopted as presented. Moved by trustee Wilson, seconded by trustee Franklin. Any discussion? Trustee Franklin, did you?
No, I think it looks, I looked it over, it looks very reasonable.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Okay, thank you. The motion is passed. And then we back to my agenda. Okay, so next item is the board governance notice of motion, Vice Chair Eddie. An accumulated operating surplus.
Also, if you don't mind, trustee Chair, I'd like to address both C and D, accumulated surplus and financial planning conversation.
By all means.
So the following two board governance policies are being presented this evening as a notice of motion on behalf of the governance committee. In 2018, the Ministry of Education underwent a funding model review of the K-12 education system, focusing on equity, accountability, and financial management. There were 10 provincial recommendations regarding financial management made by the panel. Although SD 72 was already in compliance to the majority of these recommendations prior to the release of the report, the following proposed policies will further clarify the board's and staff's responsibilities regarding accumulated surplus, long-range financial planning, and public consultation regarding that long-range financial planning. So the first policy is regarding accumulated surplus. SD 72 previously maintained an accumulated surplus policy, which defined the definition of an accumulated surplus, the amount yearly that could be drawn from the surplus, and the purposes for which it could be used. The revision to this policy, as per the recommendations of the Provincial Funding Review Panel, further clarifies the process for community feedback and transparency prior to board allocation from the surplus funds, and details more fully the categorizations of purposes that unrestricted surplus funds can be applied to. Please refer to the Board Governance Policy Handbook located on the SD 72 website if you'd like some more information on this existing policy. The second policy, which is new policy number 30 regarding financial planning and reporting. This new board policy meets recommendations of the Funding Model Review Committee and describes the following. It aligns multi-year financial planning and reporting to the framework for enhanced student learning to best align financial resources with positive student achievement outcomes. It defines long-range financial planning structures and reporting parameters on behalf of the senior leadership to the board regarding long-term fiscal outlooks, and further clarifies the stakeholder engagement, public consultation, and public transparency processes. This is a notice of motion, and these board governance policies will come back to the board at next meeting.
Yeah, so just to kind of point out, they're fairly significant. It's finance night. I have to be happy with that. Some significant changes with this, or somewhat changes with this. I just want to point out. So this is to improve board governance when it comes to financial process and policy. Our board has actually been doing the surplus and providing really good surplus transparency for many years, even before my time. But this does do some enhancements on what the board's currently doing. One of the notable changes with the surplus, though, is we will be reporting out on the what has happened to the prior year internally restricted surpluses. We do a two-step financial statement process. We'll bring a list of those appropriations, which again was intended to be very transparent, get board approval, and then it goes into the statements. But what will require this upcoming year is we'll actually say what has been spent on the year prior. With the financial plan, there's actually a couple things that I think the board might appreciate. So one of them will be a 3-year plan. And we do know sort of with our funding history, cost escalation, I think that just will highlight where the variance is going. But the other one is that we will be checking in with the board at the very beginning of each budget process. It's now in policy to basically kind of just check in with the direction of the budget for that year. So we've written that change into the financial planning policy. So we do currently do check-ins with the board as we go through our budget, but this next year we'll actually start with a bit more in-depth session with the board before we get started. So.
Are there further questions either of Secretary Treasurer Patrick or Trustee Eddy? Trustee McMahon?
Yes, I did notice the 3-year financial plan and wondered really how feasible is that given the kind of unexpected expenses that have really knocked our budget around for the last couple of years. How would that be able to be represented in a 3-year projection?
So you kind of have to do a rough estimate, and it's very similar to the preliminary budget that we just did. From 1 year from May to September, 100 student difference. We likely will encounter that. We use a demographic estimating program that tries to estimate the number of students that we'll see over the next 3 years. The ministry uses the same software, so we'll adjust revenue based on that. But they will rely on us for changes that we're seeing in learning support service categorizations and some of our costs and cost escalations. But one thing we can count on is what inflation is continuing to be. We can use our estimates for our student enrollment, but in any given year, a major employer goes out of business, economy changes, we could see that drastically change. And I think that's part of why school districts haven't been asked to do long-term financial planning in the past, is because the swings can be fairly dramatic and we are required to balance budgets. So, I think with a 3-year planning, I think boards will be in a better position to defend surpluses that have existed, because in order to support that deficit, the surplus is the only way to do that. But when the surpluses are gone, as ours, our 3rd year, we'll probably see reductions going along each year. But I think it's helpful, but it won't lead each budget process. Every budget process, we will be starting with a much closer look at where current state is, and be balancing a budget from there, making additions or reductions. So this will be, again, it will be nice. A lot of organizations do it. It is good practice to do it. Let's say we were to implement a software system and we knew we'd have to do that in 2 years. We can put stuff like that. But as dynamic as everything that happens in the classroom is, when it comes to the finance, we like boring, we like stable, we like predictable. And so that's likely what you'll see.
Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Eddy.
I actually see some opportunity in the requirements of the 3-year planning cycle for the next board. As they're looking 3 years out, there may be some opportunity for advocacy for additional funding and financing through our professional organizations with the ministry as we start to see cost pressures bubble up, because we have that longer range view as opposed to year to year. I welcome it. Maybe Kevin doesn't.
Any comments or questions? Thank you very much. So, Vice Chair Eddy and Secretary Treasurer Patrick. Okay, the next item, we've received, the city of Campbell River will be applying to to host the 55 plus BC games. And they will be held in the Comox Valley and the city of Campbell River. And what they've asked for is for our support. So you've seen the letter in your package, and the suggested motion for this is that the Campbell River School District number 72 supports the application jointly prepared by the city of Campbell River and Comox Valley Regional District staff for the 2024, 2025, or 2026 55 plus BC games to be held in the Comox Valley and the city of Campbell River. And that Campbell River School District number 72 will commit to providing in-kind support of services and facilities should the bid be successful. We have a mover for that. Okay, Vice Chair Eddy, seconded by, okay, Trustee Wilson. Is there discussion or questions? Okay, Trustee McMahon and Trustee Wilson.
I'm just a little uncertain as to the vagueness of in-kind support services. We appear to have had a history with them back in 2010. So has that given us a frame for what to expect their ask will be?
Yes, so in 2010, they utilized one of our fields for one of their events. Because school was in session, the last one was hosted the beginning of September. They utilized Rob Run's field, so it had no disruption to class activities at our elementary schools or secondary schools. And the portion of the field that it was hosted on was not the best kept sports field. It can't be used for sports anymore. So it was really just additional clear space for them to host this activity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Trustee Wilson.
That was my question as well. In-kind support of services and facilities. Having just looked at our budget for next year, is there any possibility that financial support would also be requested?
Well, it said in-kind support of services and facilities. So I think it would be pretty many. The other thing is I suspect that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that when the time comes, there will be negotiations about what it is that they're requesting. And I think the district would be quite defensive about contributing anything that's going to incur any kind of serious costs. I imagine that you will do your best to protect the district from any unforeseen.
Yeah, and actually even last time, I believe the request was for access to the fields. Maybe access to the bathrooms would have been required, but now at Rob Run, there's a field house which has access to some of those facilities. So, but I believe the nature of the events do change from time to time based on demand, and we won't know specifically as we get closer. But again, having students in session limits what we can provide in kind.
Trustee Hagan, did you have a question?
No, my question was answered. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
I have a comment. I think that the 55 plus games is a great opportunity to showcase Campbell River as a community. And I think that it's an excellent opportunity to showcase our schools. And I'm actually quite excited that we could potentially be co-sharing hosting opportunities between us and the Valley, because it does invite new people to experience Campbell River, which hopefully will just benefit the whole community in all areas as we move forward in our economic development.
Further to that, I'm thinking that the request, the application will come from the city staff. So it also gives us an opportunity to, you know, kind of pull in our relationship with the city and the rec department particularly. So yeah, I support it. As long as it doesn't cost us money, it's great.
The added, I guess, benefit of this whole thing is that it will certainly bring some economic benefit to the city as well. There'll be a lot of people staying here, using various services throughout the community. So it can only help the community as well. So, any other comments or questions? All those in favor of the motion? The motion is carried
Unanimously.
unanimously. As have all of the motions this evening. Okay. So then we will move into item 13, business administration. And the first item is finance warrant number 10, April 30, 2022. And the suggested motion is that the finance warrant number 10 dated April 30, 2022 be accepted as presented. Moved by trustee Hagan, seconded by trustee Eddy. Discussion. All those in favor? Motion is passed. Next item is the quarterly budget analysis for the period ending March 31st, 2022. Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
Yes, so this quarterly budget, I think I missed it, bringing it to the May meeting, and because the May 17th meeting was just for budget, this was as soon as I could get it to you. So, so this quarterly budget, our quarterly budgets have been very important since we have started. Since we identified that we were having some budget pressures in January, we first noticed that there was a challenge with the DDoC sick coverage, but then we also at the same time realized that there was a tremendous inflationary cost pressures that were impacting us. And so we committed to the board at that time, and we have been doing so. We've been basically monitoring every month. We've been going through the budgets as they've come in to see if we're on track. And I think in this budget, in this quarterly budget, you will see that things are starting to settle down and yet become more within the scope rather than be way out of scope. So this very first, this is just a summary of all. Again, you've got the detailed documents. I don't think I'll go through the entire thing again, but I will kind of point out some things. So the very first one is the top part where the revenues are. If you look over at the variance from budget to what we predict the budget year to date to be, it's within 0.15%. So we're actually right on budget for our revenues. Again, this March budget is based off the final. So I'd mentioned earlier when we did the preliminary is prepared in spring, but the final is prepared in after September 30th, and it's passed in February. So this is the final budget. So at this point, we knew with our student changes what those were going to be. We added teachers. We were able to get more revenue. So we know what those revenues were going to be and budgeted accordingly. Then on the wage, so this is where we had some concerns on the wages and supplies in the past. The salary and benefits, you can see that year to date, we would expect to be at about just under 41 million. We're coming in at 39.6. So we're about 3% under, which is good. It's better than being 3% over, as we had noticed we were with some of our preliminary budgets. So when we came into that final budget, we increased amounts, and we luckily have increased those budgets enough to cover what the expenses are. And then on the services and supplies, and a lot of inflationary pressures, you can see that it says it's 5%, but that's really only about $300,000 under where we expect it to be. And there's seasonal flows. We will expect to see some seasonal spending pick up as we get towards the end. But again, it does have us tracking to be under that budget. Now, the big item on this next sheet is a couple things. So we had identified some challenges with our TTOC, with our TTOC costs. And so we hit a very high peak expense in January and February. So when we look forward to the budgets, we increased, not knowing exactly when those would start to come down, but they did start to come down in March. And so you can see on our TTOC, we are under, which is great. So our TTOC budget has two components. It's got sick coverage, which is part of that, but it also has professional release time. And some of those events occur sort of later in the year as teachers get released for various items. So we do expect that TOC amount to go up a bit. But then you'll also notice, and this is some of the trade-off, is the teacher expenditure is currently over budget. So this is also part of that sick coverage cost, in that when teachers start to go, and these are related more to some of the longer term leaves that we have, we can budget it in TTOC, but sometimes that cost will track through on the teacher salary costs, and we may not get a chance to move that over until the end of the year. So we got 325 under in TTOC, you got 286. So that's pretty close, and that is positive. Again, we'd rather be on the shorter side than on the other side than over. So now the overall wage costs were under, and that actually comes from a couple of pieces. So a little bit further down, and this, unfortunately, this happens often, but you can see on that instruction column, the QP staff is under, and this is usually due to they experience the exact same illness issues that the teachers did. We had TTOCs available to support. Unfortunately, with a lot of our QP positions, we didn't have the coverage to fully replace everybody. So we also do struggle with recruitment with our educational assistants, and I did confirm with our Learning Support Services Director today that we're still encountering some of those same challenges. So we budget for them. We would love to be able to hire and have a full a full complement, and this is with some of the admin assistant positions in there, as well as some of the educational assistants. But we do run a little bit short, and that's why that budget is where it is. And then you can also then see on the operations and maintenance QP, same thing, we are under, and this has to do with some of that casual replacement supports for custodial and bus drivers. And so again, we budget for them because we would really like to have those people in positions hired. Actually, I guess the transportation one's just below, so the operations and maintenance is custodial, grounds, and trade. So so there's a little bit of a underspend because of those positions not being able to be filled. So, you know, I think this is a positive. We do have more detailed back comparing and breaking it out between the various functions. So please take a look at those if you have a chance or if you have already. So this is a positive. So we don't do a fourth quarter because our fourth quarter will be our financial statement. But as of right now, we presented and I shared what our surplus would be. This is looking positive in that there's a possibility we'll be able to replenish some of those accounts. Does it reach that $1 million concern? I don't know. At this point, it's difficult to say. So $1 million between unexpected employment standards costs, sick costs, inflation, seems to be, with the size of our district, what we're looking for. When we have a surplus above that, I know I'll feel a lot better, but I'm not quite sure that we'll get there, but we should, hopefully, when we hit our year end, be making some progress towards that.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on that presentation? Okay, thank you very much.
think I have the next one.
You do?
Okay,
Yeah.
Ah.
Capital plan bylaw.
Yes, so this one here, this capital plan bylaw looks exactly the same as it did last time, unfortunately, which it looks exactly the same because none of our major capital applications were approved. We did get 7 childcare spaces, but none of these were approved. So still, I think to the board's interest, Cedar, replacement of Cedar Elementary is number 1 for the replacement. We are looking for expansion for Ocean Grove and for Ripple Rock, as those have some, those are our growth areas. And then coming down to the seismic, Cedar's in there. Sometimes for some school districts, when you get approved for a seismic, it potentially leads to, opens the door for school replacement. So that's why it's number 1 on ours. We're really trying to support the board's goal of replacing that building. But you can see that there's others as well. We were early out of the gate with our seismic planning, our seismic applications. We actually got most of our seismic done like right when the program opened. It's been many years since we've had another one, and as you're seeing other school districts do their seismic, we kind of got the benefit of doing it really, really early. So, but as they kind of change some of those, some of the qualifications, we've got some new projects on there, and I can say that when one of these projects does come, it actually enhances the school with just you get fresh paint, you get some new flooring, you get some new ceiling lighting. Like there's some other things that we can basically reduce some of our future maintenance for a period of time. So those are really important. We do hope we get them. But you can see our total ask is $64 million for next year. Yeah, we look for the board to pass a bylaw to support these. Now, this is the major capital. We also have another minor capital application that we bring either at the June meeting or in September of next year. And that's really the funding program where we get a lot of approved projects, but those are for mechanical upgrades, for roofs, for some of that other stuff. So put this one in, and once the board approves it, I'll send it off to the administrators.
Okay. Are there any questions of Secretary Treasurer Patrick before we go to the bylaw? Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Yeah. And how many years has Cedar been number 1 now? Been a while. Yeah, a long time. Okay, so this motion will have to be passed unanimously to come into effect. The suggested motion is that the capital plan bylaw number 2023-24 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the 2023-2024 capital plan submission of the Ministry of Education and Childcare, given all 3 readings at this meeting. Moved by Trustee Hagan, seconded by Trustee McMahon. Discussion. All those in favor? The motion is passed unanimously, so we can then move on to the readings. So the suggested motion is that the capital plan bylaw number 2023-2024 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the capital plan submission to the Ministry of Education and Childcare is hereby read for the first time. Moved by Trustee Hagan, Trustee Eddy. Okay, discussion. All those in favor? Okay, motion is carried. The capital plan bylaw number 2023-24 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the capital plan submission to the Ministry of Education and Childcare is hereby read for the second time. Moved by Trustee Franklin, seconded by Trustee Wilson. Discussion. All those in favor? Motion is carried. And Finally, that the capital plan bylaw number 2023-24 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the capital plan submission to the Ministry of Education and Childcare is hereby read for the third time, passed and adopted. Moved by, okay, trustee McMahon and trustee Hagan. Okay, all those in favor? The motion is passed. Thank you very much. And committee reports, there is only one, and has to do with the liaison committee meeting with City of Campbell River, and trustee Eddie, would you
Sure.
care to make the report?
I don't have the date handy, but we did have an opportunity, trustee Kerr and myself, to meet with the city liaison committee, of which there was a great lunch prepared, and we had a great time. We had a great opportunity to just kind of discuss some of the challenges, economic challenges that the school district is facing, inquire of city staff, kind of what they predict the growth of the city of Campbell River to be, what kind of economic challenges they predict may be upcoming. City growth right now is currently at about 1.5%, according to city staff. They didn't have an explanation around the demographics and whether or not they anticipated more young families moving to the community. They recognize that the challenges that we're facing in the community of Campbell River are provincial challenges. So the lack of affordable housing, the lack of resources for young families is discouraging families from maybe moving to Campbell River, the lack of housing, basically. We did have an opportunity to speak to our request to the ministry for the rebuild of Cedar, and did have some open conversations about how we as a community can maybe come together and strategize to advocate to the ministry for the importance of that site and that building for some of the services that it provides and could expand to provide in the future. So we did make a commitment to further those discussions. And in 2023, they will be doing an urbanization review at a city level. So they'll be looking at Campbell River as the whole and starting to redevelop their long-range plan for the vision of Campbell River. It was a great meeting. I like those meetings. I feel like I'm on the cutting edge.
Yeah. When we did report back on the Cedar replacement request, because we had asked and we had asked for, and they had supported us with a letter, or responded with a letter of support for the replacement of Cedar School. So we've informed that we will continue as you talk earlier. So, yeah.
I'm always curious about the growing population of Campbell River. Did they talk about how many residents there are now at this time?
They didn't mention it specifically. They just said that the city is growing at a rate of 1.5% per year. But they do anticipate that growth to continue.
Well, thank you very much. And is there any? I guess there isn't any other business. Were there any questions from anyone present on the agenda item for the meeting? None?
No, and no questions have come in online.
Yes, okay. I guess I should have asked it that way. Okay, well, I suspect that with the length of this meeting, that anybody who had a question in the last hour and 20 minutes would have been able to get it in. So we will then move to item number 17, trustee Hagan.
Please.
Pardon?
Like to move.
Yes, okay, all those in favor? We are done. Thank you very much.
From the